I am Tom Chevalier, so I am a CNRS researcher affiliated to Sciences Po in Paris, and I work on employment and social policies towards young people in particular in Europe. And I will thus be hosting and introducing this first part on employment and social policies at the EU level. This topic relates to the larger issue of the so-called social Europe, or the social integration issue, as opposed to the economic integration. But unlike such economic integration, the EU does not generally have the competence to directly legislate on the matter. Still, that doesn't mean the EU does nothing in this policy area. In fact, globally, it assists member states in coordinating their policies through different policy instruments and different policy-making processes. Its action of the EU is therefore present, but marginal and polymorphic. In terms of policy instruments, for instance, the EU has been using proper regulation to allow the mobility of workers by stressing the importance of workers' rights. But at the same time, this regulation has been accompanied with deregulation through liberalization policies, especially concerning public services. Furthermore, and unlike national welfare states, who rely on social transfer, social spending, and redistribution, the EU budget for such transfers only equals about 1% of the European GDP, if we compare to more than 20% on average at the national level in Europe. This budget, this social spending budget, is mainly spent through two programs, through the two programs of the European Social Fund, which mainly focuses on combating unemployment and enhancing human capital on the one hand, and the European Regional Development Fund, which aims to stimulate balanced socioeconomic development in the various regions of Europe on the other hand. Also, in terms of policymaking, the action of the EU is polymorphic. First, it can go through the community method with the adoption of real pieces of social legislation, for instance, concerning workers' rights in case of international mobility. Currently, for instance, there are some debates about minimum wages or the regulation of platform workers. Second, the European social dialogue between social partners is supposed to be a delegation of legislative competence in the realm of industrial relations. However, it was active only in the 90s and the early 2000s and is not so much active anymore. Third, the bulk of the action of the EU stems from soft coordination through the so-called open method of coordination. Such method led to the European employment strategy in the 90s, which helps to monitor the reforms of national labor markets in order to combat unemployment, and to the Lisbon strategy as well for growth and competitiveness launched in 2000, for instance. The coordination of national policies is encouraged with this method, with the exchange of best practices, the use of specific indicators at the EU level, or the exchange of national expert reports. Since 2011, the coordination of employment and social policies happens within the framework of the European semester. During the European semester, member states are supposed to align their budgetary and economic policies with the objectives and rules agreed at the EU level. But the social aspect has grown within the European semester, especially since 2017 and the launch of the European pillar of social rights. It has also become the tool through which the Commission, the European Commission, also makes recommendations for social policy reforms at the national level. Hence, the action of the EU in the realm of employment and social policies is present in many aspects, but remains small, both in comparison of what national welfare states actually do and of what the EU is doing in other policy areas. Yet, scholars diverge in their interpretation of what this means. Some argue that social Europe is irrelevant in the sense that the EU is too weak in that area to tackle problems of social cohesion. Hence, we shouldn't care at all about social Europe anyway. Other scholars, however, underline the fact that social policies at the EU level are catching up, thus reflecting the neo-functionalist idea of the spillover from economic to social integration. Here, the normative argument is to say that we need to develop social Europe. Lastly, another strand of research assesses that, to the contrary, the EU is dangerous for social cohesion because of an intrinsic pro-market bias preventing social regulation. Here, scholars are overall against the EU as it stands, not social Europe per se. It is difficult to settle the debate between all these strands of research, but we must recognize at least that the role of the EU is growing, as we can see, for instance, since the beginning of the COVID pandemic, with, for instance, the launch of the Social Climate Fund, for instance, and the substantial increase of the budget allocated to social policies in general, especially towards regions most hit by economic and social difficulties. Because of their high unemployment rate, at least for some parts of the population, like young people, Western Balkans would be important beneficiaries of the EU budget in terms of employment and social policies when they integrate the EU after the enlargement procedure. And this is why it is important to reflect on the best policies to combat youth unemployment in these countries as well. I will therefore give the floor to Stevan Đurić, who is currently a student at the Faculty of Economics of the University of Montenegro and won the EP4U student contest in the employment social policies area with this very interesting paper on improving youth employment opportunities in the Western Balkans in the post-pandemic world. After his presentation, if you have any question, don't hesitate to raise your hand or directly write your question in the chat to start the discussion. Stevan, you have 5 minutes to discuss, to present your paper, so the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Tom. Hello, everyone. First of all, I want to say that it's an honor for me to be speaking at this conference, and I want to thank you for giving me this opportunity. As Tom said, I will try to briefly explain the main points of my award-winning paper that deals with the subject of youth unemployment in Western Balkans. The points of the paper, I like to think, are well supported, and I did a couple of interviews with the acting director of the Directorate for Labor and Unemployment of Ministry of Economics of Montenegro, as well as the independent advisor of the Ministry of Economics of Montenegro. And I tried to include the opinion of young people also. So I did the interview with the President of Student Council and President of Student Parliament of Montenegro. So I really owe my gratitude to all of them. In my paper, I stated that, in my opinion, when dealing with the problem of unemployment, when policymakers deal with the problem of unemployment in Western Balkans, they should focus on three main areas. Number one, education, then digitalization, and government support. First, education, of course, is very important because bad education is root of the unemployment problem. The best representation of the current state of education system in the Western Balkans can be found in the PISA testings that shows that outcomes in the region remain below international benchmark. So in order to really prepare students for the labor market, the education system needs to be more focused on so-called soft skills, those skills that include communication skill, critical thinking, problem solving, teamwork, learnability, and the rest. So we really need that on the Western Balkans. Next, my second point. My second point is digitalization. So we know that digitalization is definitely a backbone of a modern society, and in the Western Balkans region, digitalization definitely isn't on the level that it needs to be on, and bringing it up on a certain level can do wonders for unemployment rates, especially with young people. That's something that I try to emphasize in my paper. So digital technologies definitely improve productivity in every sector where they are included, and the benefits of digitalization on the Western Balkans can be twofold, in my opinion. Firstly, digitalization can help in, you Tom already mentioned the platform workers. That's something that can be very important for the Western Balkans. And what's important with that is that it helps with opening new workplaces, especially for young people. So we don't have that. They do not come at the expense of other more traditional forms of work. And secondly, digitalization can help through forming a regional digital official platform to help unemployed workers to find and apply for jobs or traineeships. That is a practice that is already happening in the EU. So we have a lot of platforms as Eurodesk, Euroguidance Network, and others. And forming similar kinds of platforms in the Western Balkans region can be really helpful for unemployment rates. And the third point, the government support. And to be specific, the government support that is focused on helping small businesses and young entrepreneurs, which will inevitably lead to new working chances and overall economic growth. So we all know that small workers and entrepreneurs present over 90% of world economy, but traditionally in Western Balkans, government support has been targeted at big companies. So in my opinion, that needs to be shifted. The government should use direct subsidies and tax incentives to provide these financial funds to small firms and particularly startups in order to improve the overall business conditions and to encourage new market entry and diversity. In the end, I want to emphasize that these changes are not easy to conduct. They are not. We need a lot of financial funds, and that is where I see the European Union as a very important partner for the Western Balkans. Not just in the financial sense. We all know that financial funds from the European Union they represented a very important resource for the Western Balkans, but in my opinion, the focus needs to be shifted on experts from the European Union that should come to Western Balkans and really help us, because having the financial funds isn't enough. We need to have the guidance in order to use those financial funds the right way, so we can really make a difference. I hope this was interesting to you, and if anyone has any questions, I'm really happy to hear them.
Thank you very much, Stevan, for your brief but synthetic and complete presentation of your paper. So I will open up the discussion. If you have any question, don't hesitate to write in the chat or raise your hand to ask your question. But maybe to start the discussion, I can ask you myself just one question. You mentioned, I was very interested in your first point about education, because it's true that now in post-industrial labor markets, the skills are absolutely crucial to access employment. and the level of skills, but also the type of skills, as you said, with the fact that you stress that soft skills are very important. However, when you say that, it's more an objective than a proper policy output. So what do you have in mind in proper policy reforms to increase the level of education in these countries and increase the level of soft skills? Is it through, for instance, I don't know, apprenticeship? Is it through other type of reform of teaching practices? What kind of policy output reforms would it be? Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question. It's a really interesting subject. So when I'm completely aware that reforming the education system isn't really an easy task, and it's something that can be done in short term. But what we can do in short term, and I'm especially, I know a lot about this because I studied in Montenegro, so I know what's the situation like. In my opinion, students should have a lot more opportunities to show their knowledge and practice. We need a lot more traineeship programs. We need some kinds of programs between faculties, universities, and real life firms in order that so that students can really feel the labor market. Because in Western Balkans, after the education, you have a lot of theoretical knowledge. And of course, that is important, but you really don't have a lot of practical knowledge. So I think that including some kind of practice in the education, not just at the faculties or universities, also in high school and elementary school, that is very important, so that young students can actually decide and actually find out what they are the most interested in, so they can direct themselves later. If we could form a system where practice is crucial as much as theoretical knowledge, then the implementation of soft skills, I think, would be automatic. Because when you feel the labor market, after I started working in the banking sector, I didn't need a lot of time in order to feel the labor market, in order to feel all the things that are important, but that are those things are something that, in my opinion, should be really taught. Should be the faculty should teach their students about them. So, in one word, more practice, less theoretical knowledge, or same theoretical knowledge but more practice.
Thank you very much, Stevan. So are there any questions about this topic? Well, I can continue the discussion on the matter, because I think it's a very interesting conversation. You mentioned the importance of practice and like on the job, let's say, training. Which is very important to combat unemployment. For instance, this is why we find a very low youth unemployment in Germany, because of the importance of on-the-job practice. You're right. However, if I make the connection with your second point and your second point about digitalization, actually what we see is that to increase digitalization, we do not need practical on-the-job training. We need to increase very general skills that usually are provided through universities, higher education. So how do you square the puzzle? How do you solve the puzzle about this possible contradiction between on-the-job practice, which is usually happening at the secondary level, and on the other hand, boosting digitalization, which usually happens at the higher education level?
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. That's also an interesting topic. Digitalization in this context is very interesting, and I was hoping for some discussions about digitalization, since when researching for my work, it was actually very interesting to hear and to find out different opinions about this digitalization. In my opinion, the digitalization area and policies in that area are not completely do not affect the same group of people. If you understand me, if you know what I mean. So the education is and helping in education is supposed to help the people that go higher up, you know, like universities, faculties, PhDs, and those type of that group of people. But we have to understand that not everyone is going for the higher education. So we have a lot of people that stop after high school, especially in Western Balkans. That's something that we definitely need to improve on, but that's a different story. Digitalization area, and in the context that I imagined it for my paper, is the context of helping the low educated. So you in order to reach a certain level of digitalization, we need a high educated people to implement them. But after you reach a certain level of digitalization, digital skills are digital technologies, and that's one of the main things why I think they are so popular and so important, is that they are very easy to use. So pretty much everyone can use those technologies. So in my opinion, improving the digitalization would actually help the lower educated side of people, the people that can't actually work in that don't have the education in order to work in some I don't know, banking industry, other sectors that require the higher education. But it can be very helpful for them to find some types of work, like platform workers work on demand, that include digital skills that we need digital economy in order to get. But when you have a worker, he doesn't need to have a higher education in order to work in those sectors. So I think that digitalization in that context can be really helpful for those who are low educated, while bumping up education would be really helpful for those who want to keep up with their education. They want to go higher, they want to learn constantly, and that's pretty much it.
Thank you, Stevan, for your answer. Actually, there is a question about this in the chat. I don't know if you see the question from Ilaria Giustachini, who is asking about how do you think digitalization can be integrated in university curricula?
Thank you. That's also a very interesting question. In the Western Balkans, we actually, not just in the Western Balkans, I'm pretty much sure all over the world, the importance of digitalization in university really reached its peak after the COVID-19 pandemic. So we had a situation where we needed to get to our classes. The education really didn't have the option to stop completely, but because of the pandemic, we weren't able to go physically to classes. So that's, for me, that's like a paradigm of digitalization in the education process. Really in Montenegro, it was done pretty efficiently. All the universities have the digital platform. They have the ability to hold those classes online, and that's kind of, in my opinion, that's something that wasn't really even pretty much nobody talked about that possibility before the COVID-19 pandemic. And I think that the COVID-19 later with digitalization really showed the complete possibilities of the education sector. So now when you want to study abroad, maybe you don't need to go to the other country. You can listen to classes online. When you aren't able to go to some classes, you can listen to classes online. Maybe classes can be recorded. Every university should have its own platform. Even tests can be conducted online. That's really a subject that was kind of implemented in Montenegro at this time. So I think that really shows the importance of digitalization in education sector. And to improve labor market integration of graduates and match skill demands, I think that is the second thing about digitalization that I mentioned, the digital platform. So we have a lot of those platforms in European Union, but unfortunately on Western Balkans, we really don't. So if we could have a platform that is connected, so let's say a regional platform supported by the government that is connected with a lot of universities, and that could really open a lot of chances for finishing students, so they can find the jobs easier, so they can use their theoretical knowledge in order to really do something. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stevan, for this really complete answer. And I will now give the floor to Michaela for the next session about anti-discrimination policies at the EU level. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you very much for the floor, and good morning to everybody. Greetings from Slovakia. I'm very happy to be here. My name is once again Michaela Dénešová. I'm from Faculty of Social and Economic Sciences, Comenius University in Bratislava. And basically, it is my pleasure to introduce the second half of our morning panel, which will focus on the topic of non-discrimination, and especially we will focus on the LGBTI plus rights and the role of the European Union within this topic. I'm even more happy to do that during June, a Pride Month, which we are celebrating right now. And we need to focus on the fact that human rights and non-discriminations are core values of the European Union. All member states, by their decision to enter the Union, agree to follow, protect, as well as enforce these values. However, currently we can see process of would say a huge backsliding in this area, especially in the region where also Slovakia belongs. When we look on the Poland and Hungary, these countries are showing us that the follow basic values of the European Union is not matter of course. From my expertise, I can say that also the Slovakia is not on the best way with respect to this area. We are very good in taking examples from Hungary as well as Poland. So we will see how the future will looks like within this topic. But we need to say that rights of LGBT plus community are human rights, and their violation means discrimination. And the EU is trying to protect and spread its values, and is doing that not only within its borders, but behind them as well. We can see the EU as normative power within the region, and even though there are limited competencies in the topic of human rights, we have a lot of examples of good practices within the EU. And with respect to that, it is my pleasure to introduce you Niccoló de Vita, a student at University College Dublin, who has won with his amazing paper, the EP4U student contest in the topic of non-discrimination and fundamental rights. And Niccoló will present us paper with the headline Caring for LGBTQ plus people across Europe. And it is also my pleasure to welcome our second speaker of this part of the panel, Myrthe Bovendeaard from the European Parliament, who will follow us with her inputs regarding our topic. And after this, we will continue with the debate framed into the connection of our topics within the EP4U project, means social policy, employment policy in connection to neighborhood policy, as well as policy regarding to non-discrimination. And there will be also space for questions, but for now, Niccoló, floor is yours.
Hello, thank you. It's an honor to be here and to speak to all you. And so my report focused on the challenges that the LGBTQI people face in Europe, as well as some clear recommendations as to what can be done to improve the status of the community all across the European Union, because it's important to note that there's different countries who have different laws, and there's different levels and rankings. So in the last 30 to 40 years, there have been great efforts put forth by both the EU as a union and by the single member states. So that ranges from same-sex marriage to equality strategies published by the EU that have greatly helped reduce inequalities. Despite this, recent data still shows the deepening of inequalities and enormous struggles for the LGBTQI community. While many countries in Western Europe have legalized same-sex marriages, there are still countless countries in the EU who have not yet done so, and EU in the policy in this area has not incentivized these countries to push for more equal rights. Moreover, even in the countries where LGBTQI people have formal rights and equality, there's still a stigma and ignorance surrounding the community, which causes them to face different challenges, both on a systematic level, but also day-to-day level. So my paper outlines the main challenges, mainly those of mental health issues and lack of support, which are interlinked and related in different ways. Studies from the 90s onwards have shown the staggering fact that most LGBTQI individuals are many times more likely to commit or attempt suicide, as well as self-harming. The average LGBTQI person may be 3.4 times more likely to attempt suicide rather than the straight peers, with extremes going up to 7 times more likely in certain countries. In a world where we're already facing a suicide crisis, this has led to even worse conclusions, with suicide becoming the second leading cause of death between 10 to 24-year-olds. Now, pointing out that there are differences and issues within the community isn't enough, and thus my paper also looks towards why there are differences and issues that arise. The heart of the issue is the day-to-day discrimination and general non-acceptance, and in some places, even hatred of LGBTQI+ individuals that has led to this mental health crisis within the community. In 2019, it was reported that 43% of LGBTQI+ individuals surveyed had been discriminated against, which is an increase of 6% since 2012. In 2020, a paper reported that 11% of LGBTQI individuals had been sexually assaulted, and that trans and intersex people were 17 to 22% more likely to be assaulted than cis peers. Lastly, this all culminates into general life unsatisfaction, as well as mental health problems mentioned above. Studies done in OECD countries showed that trans youth were 50% more likely to be unsatisfied with their lives, 460% less likely to have good mental health, and 490% less likely to have high self-esteem. To fix these, it would be important to realize that hate in the people is they're not born with it, it's taught, it's something that it is learned. No one is born with negative opinions on the LGBTQI+ or any other communities. Thus, the European Union should aim to create frameworks for both teachers and parents on how to care for LGBTQI children, as well as spreading awareness about what it means to be part of that community, which in turn will spread acceptance and tolerance rather than hate. Furthermore, schools should put in more effort into protecting LGBTQI+ children by providing a safe space for them and also support in discovering their own personal identities. The second recommendation is that the EU should aim to fund and create support groups specifically created to help the LGBTQI people in whatever needs they might have, which would be primarily staffed by other LGBTQI people, as they would be able to provide firsthand experience on the issues that they may be facing that cis people may not have. This would be a key institution in helping LGBTQI people accept and discover their sexualities and identities, as well as provide them with whatever support they may need in their lives, whether it is transitioning or entering into civil unions. Currently, issues that are faced by the LGBTQI+ people are barriers to transition or to seek help. For example, there's a lot of stigma surrounding asking doctors about transition advice, as well as it's very hard to find information that is hidden away in multiple government websites and with medical jargon that is not understood by the common person. Furthermore, a study carried out in Lisbon showed that there is a current lack of doctors and professionals who are equipped to deal with the mental health issues that they're facing. And my recommendation would create coordinated and integrated models of care that are currently unmet by the different systems. And lastly, these places would fill up the gaps left by the LGBTIQ equality strategy of 2020 to 2025 published by the European Union, which does recognize that there is an issue of mental health, but fails to see the benefit of creating helplines for those who may be struggling and in need of help. In conclusion, these ideas are pragmatic approaches, as the foundation of these helplines already exist across different countries, for example, Samaritans in the UK and Ireland. And the European Union's task could be to expand them to include help for the LGBTIQ+ people.
Thank you, Niccoló, very much for the presentation of a very interesting paper. I'm not sure whether there are any questions from the audience, but I would like to start probably with Stevan. Stevan, okay, so the floor is yours in this case.
Thank you. I first want to tell that I read the Niccoló's paper and it was very interesting. And I wanted to ask him how does he think the EU, European Union, ranks, how does it compare about the LGBTQI plus rights with the rest of the world? Are we better or we worse? And I wanted to ask you if you think the improving the situation with those rights can be done only in the EU, or should it be done all across the world? So how would you say the connection between different regions and rights LGBTQI plus in different regions can affect those rights in the EU?
That's very interesting and thought-provoking questions. So I do think that the EU is quite ahead compared to other areas, but that, of course, really depends on the countries, because the EU is a union of different countries, and these different countries, they range from more accepting to least accepting. For example, I think a great resource that anyone can just find is the Rainbow Map of Europe, and they publish this every year, which shows the different countries and their level of legal and human rights situation of the LGBTQI plus community. And for example, there's some countries like Belgium and the Netherlands and Malta, which are from 70 to 90% of acceptance, with 100% being the full of respect of human rights and full equality. But there are definitely some countries like Poland and Romania that lag behind at only 16 or 19%, even Italy, 23%. So I do think that although a lot of Western Europe is already quite ahead, there's still some countries that do lag behind. And there's definitely a need for the EU to incentivize these countries to move forward. I know that there's already a piece of policy that requires all EU countries to accept the recognition of same-sex partnerships and civil unions, but really that is not enough to achieve full equality. And for the second part, that is very interesting. Europe cannot operate on its own. It's not it's integrated into the global community. So I do think that there's definitely a need to create even like overarching, maybe with the UN or other organizations, in partnership with the EU, different policies and advice that can be spread all over the world to increase the acceptance of the LGBTQ, not just within Europe, but in countries where they may need it even more.
Thank you very much. Maybe Stevan, do you want to add something, or we still have 2 minutes before?
Yeah, I completely agree with Niccoló on this one, and I just wanted to check his opinion on this, because I really think that improving those rights all over the world is very important, because improving them only in Europe, it just isn't enough. And never will be enough, because improving them in one part of the world, it doesn't really matter if it's Europe or US, and leaving them at the really low level on the rest of the world will just that really will just make a worse of a situation, because there will always be a different tides of people that really don't want them to be accepted, unless if we work on accepting them all over the world. So I completely agree with Niccoló on this one.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions from the audience? Not right now. Okay. In that case, I will save mine for the later discussions, and I would like to give the floor to Ms. Bovendeaard for her remarks according to the topic.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Michaela, and thank you to everyone for organizing this great event. I'm really glad that I could join today and have this important discussion. So first of all, thanks a lot. And then to Niccoló, I mean, your paper, I totally get, I read it, I totally get why he won, because there's so many good ideas in that. But first, maybe let me give a bit of an overview from the European Parliament on the different developments that we see. So I'm an assistant, and I work for Kim van Sparrentak. She's a Dutch Green MEP, who's also part of the LGBTI community herself. And we've been working on quite a lot of topics here in the European Parliament. We work a lot, for example, on housing, on digital rights, but also a lot on equality related issues, so LGBTI rights and gender equality. So in the European Parliament, we have a huge intergroup, which is basically a collection of members of the European Parliament. And actually we have an LGBTI intergroup, which is the biggest group in the European Parliament. There are 170 MEPs in there, and in total we have 700, so that's quite a lot. And all these MEPs are really engaged to advance on LGBTI equality. So we work across parties, we work together to basically improve the rights of LGBTI people. So this is really something I think that's very valuable in the Parliament. Let me start a bit on the more negative trends we see in the LGBTI equality. So I think Michaela also pointed it out before in her speech. There are a lot of developments in different countries. Of course, also as Niccoló pointed out, it's not that the EU has a big competence on a lot of things that are related to equality, but they have competence on human rights and to protect European values in that sense. So what we see, for example, in Poland and Hungary is that the government is really scapegoating the LGBTI community there. They're implementing anti-LGBTI laws like we saw in Hungary last year. In Poland, there were LGBTI free zones implemented. I mean, that's in 1/3 of Poland, that was really like, a big blow to the LGBTI community. And we've seen other trends in other countries. So basically, what we tried to do as the EU was when we got these kind of stories, for example, in 2019 of the LGBTI free zones, as a parliament directly, we had a debate about it, and we were very, very firmly against this. And we tried to mobilize people also in the European Commission. I mean, the Commission is also responsible for protecting European values and protecting rights. So we made sure that this issue was tackled. Like, we said, please, this is not acceptable in the EU where we have such high standards, as we say, of human rights. I mean, we know that in practice, it's not always the case. But we said, listen, we need to do something about this. And the European Commission is the one that can act on that. So, for example, with the free zones in Poland, the Commission decided, after a lot of push, I think also from the Parliament and from civil society, that they were going to block some funds to the regions that declare themselves as free zones. And that helped, because then they revoked this title. I think that's a good step, but we also should acknowledge that that doesn't solve the hate, that it's still there under certain people, So, and then, for example, on Hungary last year with the anti-LGBTI law, I mean, this is something that I think the first time in history in the EU that many countries in the European Council, so where all the countries are gathered, they spoke out against this and told Orban, listen, you're crossing a line here. This is clear discrimination. And so I think that got the ball rolling in a sense that LGBTI rights and equality was high on the political agenda. And finally, we were talking about, blocking funds to countries who do not uphold fundamental rights, who clearly attack the rule of law, because it's often also a rule of law issue in these countries. So, but it's still, when we talk about EU law, it's very hard, for example, to kick countries out. Let's say there's some procedures, but it's very difficult. So you have to find ways to move countries towards, let's say, the right path and towards equality. So a bit more on the other trends is that we do see in society two things. I think one is that we see a rise in hate and violence. When we look at the available research on that, I mean, the Fundamental Rights Agency publishes yearly research on that. We do see that the violence is increasing, especially also when you talk about online violence, when you talk about hate speech and hate crimes. I mean, there is something where you see a trend in there, and it's not getting better. On the other side, on the positive side, I think that because of this, people are speaking out more. They're going more on the streets. They're uniting against this because they see this kind of hate and they're not accepting it. Because we're free to be who we want to be and who we want to love. So on the other side, I do see two sides against each other in that sense. But now a bit more about the positive developments, because it's not all bad things happening. I do see, for example, from EU side, it was the first time ever this parliamentary term that we have a commissioner on diversity and equality who is very, also I think personally very invested in advancing LGBTI rights. This is also why we now have this LGBTI strategy, which the Commission is following up on. So they're proposing a lot of legislation that helps the community further. One example is there's going to be legislation on hate speech and hate crime, which I said before, it's very much an issue, especially online, because there it's not tackled. It's seen as normal to be hateful online. So they're going to propose legislation on that. And then there's a very important legislation coming up about violence against women. It's violence against women, but I think as Greens, we want it to be about gender-based violence. So it needs to be more inclusive, because it's not only women who disproportionately have to deal with violence. It's also a lot of people from the LGBTI community, especially trans people. I mean, we have to be clear, we need different policies for different letters in the community, because sometimes we tend to, take the whole community together, but, everyone has to deal with different kinds of forms of discrimination and different kinds of legislation. So I think this piece of legislation on violence against women is going to be very important, because we're going to criminalize more on violence, and especially criminalize more on violence online. So I think this is a very good step, and we're going to make sure as Greens that this piece of legislation will be inclusive and it's going to really help people. So those two are very important. And there's another piece of legislation that's going to be presented in a few months, and that's going to be about the obstacles of free movement for rainbow families, because now it is a case that when you're a rainbow family, it's not so easy to move from one country to another, because then you might not recognize your parental status. So this is really, in the European Union, we have agreed that we have free movement and everyone can work and live where they want. But when we look in practice, we see that rainbow families are discriminated, and they have to litigate for years to get their rights ensured. So now we're going to have a piece of legislation that will hopefully tackle this as well. So that's a bit, I think, the positive progress we see. On the paper, great paper that Niccoló wrote, I think a lot of things that you wrote in the paper really resonated with me, and I think I can explain a little bit on the different points. So, for example, you indicated, research. I do believe research is very important. It's an issue that I see across topics that we work on in the Parliament, that we never have enough data, we never have enough research about what people are experiencing. So, and if you have the right data and the right research, you can make better policies. So I completely agree that we need to, especially look at stress and anxiety and quality of life, because this is it's not often researched. So this is something definitely that I will take on board and push for this. So I'm very glad you wrote a part on school campaigns for acceptance, because I think this is a really, really important point to look at education. We met with some very nice students a few months ago. They set up a Polish school ranking system. I would really advise you to look it up, because I think it's an amazing idea. And basically what they developed is that they have a survey and they put it in Polish schools all over the country. So it's a survey that students themselves fill out, and they can indicate how they think how their school is friendly towards LGBTI people and how inclusive the school education is. So I think it's very good because this creates awareness, for one, to see, okay, where are we at in the school? It creates awareness in a way that people start thinking about how can we make our school more inclusive? What are the things that we can set up? And they also have this award ceremony where every year they pick a school that has best practices, and they also try to facilitate best practice sharing. So we were so kind of inspired by this project that we proposed, together with other members of European Parliament from different political groups, we proposed to have a pilot project across the EU to kind of roll out this specific survey project to all European countries, because we believe that every country could profit from such a survey, and this would really make schools more inclusive. Because, you know, I think when I went to high school, I remember from, for example, having sex education, that it was so focused on cisgender people, and it was so, you know, old school and conservative that, you know, I think me and my peers were all like, okay, if we want to know things about sex, we're going to just, you know, go Google, because we're not going to, you know, the school's not going to teach us the right things, and it's not, you know, an inclusive teaching. And when I look at my little brother, he's 15 now, also in high school, getting the same exact course as I did, you know, so you don't see any improvement there. It's still really conservative. So I think sex inclusive education is super important. Also to create awareness on, you know, that you can have an open environment to talk about gender identity, about sexuality. I think that's really important to do it in schools, because it's not always that people have the right environment at home to talk about this. So I think it's very important to focus on this particular aspect. And then you made some suggestions for learning centers, and yes, I agree, like, especially when it comes to helplines, I think it's a very good idea to set this up and to have this kind of you know, peer support, because sometimes people don't have anyone to talk to and can be very lonely. So I think there's a great solution to that. So yeah, that's my feedback on the paper. I really thank you for writing it, and I hope many people will read it, and I will definitely take your suggestions on board. And please, if anyone in the room has a question, you know, I'm very happy to answer anything. You know, I always say, like, no questions are dumb questions, so you can just, you know, go ahead. But thanks a lot for, well, listening to my story.
Thank you very much for your thoughts. I believe it is very important that we are also meeting here as people from different member states, and we see a lot of issues differently, because when you are talking about sex education, I'm thinking about my country, if there is no sex education in schools. So also these differences between countries is really important to reflect and to talk about them, because only in that way we can reach the same standards for people and for youth currently living in the EU. We are running a little bit not out of time, but we are on time. That's amazing. But I'm thinking maybe if there are no questions from the audience to our guest, and I see no hands, or maybe Niccoló, you can react, or before we move to the common discussion connected also to Tom and Stevan topic. Do you want to, or?
Yeah, I just wanted to put, you know, just one last thing, especially with, you know, communities. It's very different for the LGBTQI people to find support in their real life, especially when there's, you know, so much hate. And that's definitely something that, you know, that the EU should address. Especially, for example, even in Japan, there has been recently a new law making it punishable to have spread hate crimes or hate speech online, which is definitely something that should be also addressed within the EU. because for lots of trans people, online communities are their only like resort or escape from their real lives. So I think that's also important to protect these spaces where they can find comfort in.
Mm-hmm. I totally agree. It's very important, but we still need to think about the possibilities of the EU, about competencies of the EU. We need to follow them, and then there is a question whether there is a possibility to increase them or to make it wider in different areas. So that's also the question, maybe for today or for the following years, also in connection to the conference on the future of Europe, which is happening right now, still is happening. So I believe we need to discuss also this. But let's move to the little bit connected topic of not only the possibility of EU to act in the area of rights, of human rights, fundamental rights, LGBTIQ+ rights. Within the borders, but also behind the borders of the EU, because EU is international actor, and we know that EU is able to influence issues behind the borders. What do you think? We have several topics here. Is the European Union successful enough in promoting in this case, LGBTIQ+ rights behind the borders, especially in the connection of the fact that the EU is not able to pursue them sufficiently, I would say, within the borders. So what do you think? Maybe also in connection to the youth, in connection to the employment, because following the pandemic, we saw horrible, like, from my perspective, violation of free movements, which is basic standard of the European Union. So what do you think? Maybe our students, or Tom, or Myrthe, or Stevan, Niccoló?
I think everyone is like, who goes first? No, so across the borders, I mean, that can be very broad, you know, and I don't know if you're talking about the rest of the world, but in any case, first question, I think when we look at neighboring countries, there are a couple of countries that want to become member of the EU, and they're in the process of becoming candidates. For example, Kim and I are traveling to North Macedonia next week for the Pride in Skopje. And you do see that this country, for example, has taken a lot of steps to, to improve fundamental rights, improve human rights, and to be closer to the EU values in that sense. So I think that process also really helped them to pay more attention to LGBTI rights. They organized Pride since the past years. Before that, there were no Prides, you know. So I think in that sense, when we look at neighboring countries of the EU, that the EU has a good effect on trying to move countries more towards democracy, because also with democracy also comes respect of human rights in general. So I think on that, there's a good effect. But when we look at, for example, these things, as I mentioned before, the worsening steps of some countries in the EU that do not respect rule of law and fundamental rights, I think it doesn't give a good signal to the rest of the world about, that we're, people see Europe as, it's the best democracy in the world, and we have the highest human rights standards. But if we don't have mechanisms in place to really protect that and to really ensure that, you can also see backsliding in Europe. It's not like we will maintain this level of human rights and it will be only better from now on. We need to protect these rights. It's not like, I think we always need to stand up for democracy and human rights, because we know that it can be taken away in that sense. So in that sense, I think we still have a good image on human rights across the world, but we shouldn't tap ourselves on the shoulder and say, we're doing great, we're perfect. No, we really need to look internally about and be honest about how it's going, and to keep on fighting for policies that achieve true equality, because it's about acceptance on the one hand in society, on the other hand, it's also about, you know, improving legislation, because we're really not there when we look at, for example, legal gender recognition, about marriage equality. You know, there are a lot of things to do in many countries. So I think we should focus on that for sure.
Stevan?
So I just wanted to kind of say 2 points that my opinion on this subject. EU can affect countries outside of the borders of the European Union. I think the EU really, its effect is really big on candidate countries, because in some way those countries really try to enter the European Union. It's kind of bad. Can you hear me speaking?
Not very well right now.
So,
Maybe try to turn off the video for you.
sure. So as I was talking, I wanted to point out that EU's effect on the countries, candidate countries, can be a lot bigger, and European Union has a lot of more impact on the candidate countries, since those countries that want to enter the European Union really have to follow the instructions of the European Union. So we can see in the Western Balkans, we are all pretty much trying to enter the European Union. So the LGBTQI plus rights constantly improve over the bigger period of time, because the national governments really try to improve them so they can please the European Union, which can be a really good thing. And the second point is that regarding the subject of LGBTQI plus rights, I really think that the future is bright. So I think younger generation, in my opinion, pretty much the younger generation really has a lot of tolerance. They have a lot of compassion. So I think that as the time goes, the things will only get better and better.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. I totally agree. I see hopes in younger generation, because even in Slovakia we have researches where 60% of young people under the 30 do not have no problems with the LGBTI community, in comparison, for example, to only 30% of people over 30 and older. So we see hopes in the younger generation, definitely. Any other comments to my questions, or maybe to connection to the labor market, because or employment policy, because this is very important, and we see what also Myrthe mentioned is the intersectionality of discrimination of LGBTIQ people. It is not the same for lesbian or gays or trans people. Also in connection to the labor market, they are facing different ways of discrimination, unfortunately. Still, maybe Tom, you can follow this in connection to the employment policy or the social policies of the European Union. But Niccoló raised the hand.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that it has been shown that the LGBTQI community has lower employment rates, often due to discrimination, both when they have a job, maybe from their employer or customers or co-workers, but both trying to find a job. There's maybe discrimination upon the hiring processes, and that would be something that the EU should try and tackle, because that does lead to higher youth unemployment just across the different states.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, no, I completely agree, Niccoló. It's an issue in the job, and it's just an issue when people are employed. And we know, for example, on the EU level, we have anti-discrimination laws against, concerning employment, because employment is an area where, as the EU, we do have competence to make legislation on. And it's been in place for a long time, but we still see that there's discrimination. So it's also about enforcement of this law, but it's also hard in that sense to prove that you're being discriminated against when you apply for a job. But we know it's happening, and for example, when people want to get a house, in the Netherlands, we have a huge housing crisis. That's why we, as an office, we work a lot on housing as well. You see that there's just outright discrimination of the LGBTI community, also people of color, that people are like, okay, I have so much choice, I will, it's very easy to discriminate when there's a shortage of housing. And we try to tackle that as well. But I think it's a lot about, also, it comes down to I think it comes down to acceptance and sharing stories and connecting with people in that way, because there's a lot of, especially when it comes to trans people, I think a lot of people have prejudice because they don't understand, they just don't know. So I always say to people, encourage them to talk about it and to share stories, and because if we don't connect in that way, we start to polarize and say, okay, you're bad because you're against this and this. Well, I think if we talk more to each other, we have greater acceptance, but it's a really long process, of course, and that is something that Michaela said, that also for me, it's young people give me so much courage. I'm not old at all, but when I see the young generation on the streets, in prides and protests and talking to people and making these topics discussable and talking about it in schools, I think that's a huge power. And I really feel like this is changing society in general. But of course, we do have also generational gaps, and we need to also talk about how to connect generations better. But that's a whole different topic I can go on for an hour about, but I think that's really important. Yeah.
We have also two questions in the chat. I will read the very first one. Do we find the most discrimination in historically Christian EU states? What is being done for anti-discrimination and discussion with these religious groups, not just Christianity, but Islam and other conservative groups? Well, from my perspective as a researcher, of course, there is a connection between Christianity and the discrimination, especially in the area of gender equality and LGBTIQ rights, which is also connected to gender equality at the end of the day. So there is a connection, but not necessarily just this one. It is also about the development of a state, development of a society. We see amazing steps in countries such as Ireland, which is strongly Christian country, and there is equality with respect to LGBTIQ people, or some kind of equality. When we look on those countries, on those 6 countries which still do not have any legal recognition of LGBTIQ people or their rights with respect to marriage or same-sex couples, same-sex registered partnership, is the Slovakia, Poland, Latvia, Lithuania, Bulgaria, and Romania. Not necessarily strongly Christian country, even though, for example, Slovakia is, or Poland is definitely very strongly or define themselves as a Christian country. But we could discuss the Christianity or the level of Christianity here. It depends on the state of society, depends on the role of church within the country, whether there is a strong impact on the political life, and whether the topic of discrimination or and human rights in general, not focusing only on LGBTIQ rights, but human rights in general, it is about from my perspective, it is about the state of a country, whether the country understands that is responsible for fulfilling and enforcement and protection of human rights, because at the end, it is not the European Union, it is a nation state who is responsible for that. The European Union is, from my perspective, a very good tool which can help us to be better from this perspective. This is how I see, maybe Myrthe as a practitioner more at the EU level would see it maybe differently, or you can add.
Yeah, no, I fully agree with what you just said. From a personal point of view, I was raised a Catholic, so my especially my grandparents are still very, not Orthodox Christian, but quite strict. And I had a discussion with my grandma, I think a few years ago, where I talked about transgenders, and she was just very like, no, this is not acceptable, and we don't accept it in the church. And I was trying to, because I always wondered as a kid as well, like reading the Bible, because I had to read the Bible, but what I got out of that is that Jesus Christ basically preached love. He if you want to believe in the whole story of Jesus Christ, but I'm not a believer myself anymore, but I always wondered, like, he preaches so much love, and, love thy neighbors and all of this. And then there comes the church, which preaches hate. And I always found that so hard to understand. Like, why do you, if everyone is a child of God, then why do you discriminate based on who you want to love or who you are, so this always never made a lot of sense to me. And I think that's also, it's again, super valuable to talk to Christian people who do not believe in equality in that sense, to try to talk to them. And I'm not being naive in saying that everyone will persuade, because I mean your upbringing and your religion, it can be a very strong thing. But I think that that's what we should do more, to engage in dialogue in that way. And I do agree, in some countries where, there's Orthodox Christianity, that's the majority of the religion, you also see more hate in that sense. But I don't think that religion in itself is bad in that sense. It's about what you believe as a community. And I think, of course, the church has a big role to play there. And also when you look at the Catholic Church, the Vatican, I mean, it's new with this Pope, it's already better than with previous popes, but it's still like, he cannot explicitly say that he's in favor of Lgbti rights, because, it's also a political institution, the Vatican Church. So I think, that's a bit my view on it, but we need to still try to engage in dialogue, and I think that's very valuable.
Yeah, I totally agree that there is even clash between churches at the national level and the in this case Vatican or other. It's not only about the Catholic Church; it's also about other churches here, that there are huge clashes even between them. So it is hard also to follow and explain their role in these topics, but still. We need to believe, or we need to focus on the fact that we are doing that voluntarily. We enter the EU voluntarily, and we agreed as a state to follow the standards, and the standards is the protection of human rights at the end of the day. So that's
and that sometimes clashes with the freedom of religion, which is also right. So you see that, for example, in churches, or in Netherlands, we have this weird system where we have religious primary schools, which I'm against, because I don't think you should force a religion on a child. But anyways, we have these schools where, there's basically no oversight of what is being taught there to children, or what is being preached in the church. It's always a clash of freedom of religion against protecting human rights, when this religion is not in favor of human rights for everybody. So that's always a very hard balance. And also something I wanted to add, that we see with ultra-conservative religious groups. I mean, there are these kind of groups in Europe for sure, but we see a trend that in the last, I think, years, maybe decades, they receive a lot of funding from very rich people. And there's been not a lot of research done yet, but we know that these groups have a lot of money to propagate basically against LGBTIQ people. For example, in Poland, we have this group Ordo Iuris. They're very ultra-conservative, and they're also the religious group that was behind the LGBTI free zones. So they have a lot of money to basically campaign, to team up with churches and go out on the streets and campaign basically against LGBTI, against community. So this is something that I feel like it's very important also to have financial transparency, also with political groups that might be supported through these ultra-religious groups. I think it's very important to have more research on where the money is going, because when we look at LGBTI NGOs and activist groups, they usually don't have so much money really to campaign for equality. So we're also fighting against the big money and the big interests of some big groups. So I think we need to be very alert on this. And we're trying to do that in Europe at least too. Kim always, in speeches, she always mentions this issue because I think it's a growing issue that we cannot underestimate right now.
Maybe Niccoló, how do you see this perspective, this problem? I don't want to frame it as a problem, but it's still the issue of clashes between church and the human rights, not only LGBTIQ+, but in general human rights.
Yeah, I think it's a very important issue because the EU should definitely give the right to practice your own religion, but at the same time, this right must end where it starts infringing upon the rights of others. So of course, anyone can be whatever religion they identify with, but nowhere in the religion is it inherently against the LGBTIQ community. So, with my ideas and proposals of spreading acceptance rather than hate, that would also apply to, different Christian communities or whatever other religion where they are Christian or, Muslim or whatever other religion, but are still accepting of the community because, they're taught to accept them rather than hate them.
Thank you. We have another questions, and we are running till the end of our panel, so I think that we can finish with this one, but it's very interesting from my perspective. Hugh is wondering to what extent can the EU be a true authority on how things should be done in its candidate countries when it has so many problems in lack of employment and lack of social rights throughout the EU 27. Maybe even Stevan can discuss this because the employment policy is his topic. He was writing about that, also the paper.
Yeah, definitely. So I mentioned already the authority of the European Union on the candidate countries, and the very important thing that I think about candidate countries is the will to cooperate with the European Union. So I don't think countries really have the luxury to explicitly say to the European Union, no, we don't think that your instructions are good and we are not going to follow them, because that would pretty much hinge the complete process of being admitted to the European Union, and that's pretty much it. So yeah, of course, the EU has a lot of its own problems, especially after the crisis, the COVID and the Russian crisis. But I really don't think that there is a lot of work for the European Union regarding the candidate countries with things such as LGBTQI+ and social policies and the rest, because those are the things that national governments should care about. And the job of the EU for the candidate countries is to just give them instructions. So to tell them, we want this, you have to do this in order to be admitted to the European Union, and maybe some financial support and some expert support in those areas. and then you leave the things to the national governments to do the rest. While in the European Union, if we have a, let's say, country like Poland, there is really the European Union, especially because it doesn't have a right instruments to punish the countries that aren't following its instructions. It really can't do much, you know. I mean, it feels like that. It just feels like the impact of the European Union is much stronger, and its authority is much stronger and bigger in the candidate countries rather than actually the member countries. I don't know if you guys agree with me.
Yeah, I fully agree with what you said. Especially on, I think we have these criteria, as you mentioned, you know, when countries want to join the EU, it's a very long process, and then all of the countries need to agree that these countries can join, and we invest, and then we say, okay, you have to fulfill these criteria. But once you're inside the EU, there's no proper mechanism to really enforce the criteria that we also put to candidate countries. So a good democracy, respect for human rights, all these things. So there's a flaw in how the EU was designed in the treaty. So that's also, I think, why we have this conference on the future of Europe. It's very important to discuss with people, and I think a lot of recommendations that result from these discussions are about changing the treaties, which is basically the constitution of the EU. And there it's also in the treaties, it kind of stipulates how we can not attack countries, but when they're not upholding these rights, what we can do. And for the moment, there's almost nothing we can do. We cannot kick out the country. We can almost not withhold money. We tried, for example, with Poland and Hungary to withhold the recovery fund, basically, that countries get because of COVID. We tried to stall it for as long as we could, but there was no way to not give them any money. So there's really, I don't want to be cynical, but there's not a lot of things that we can do internally when a country is not respecting democracy and human rights. So I hope that we will have these treaty changes and this will be better in the future. But for now, I mean, that's a bit the story. When it comes to social rights and what you mentioned in the chat, I think for a long time, the EU has been a lot about economic integration and economic policy and cooperation. For the last decades or two, I think we've moved more towards a political union. So also the powers of the EU have expanded in terms of what they can make legislation on, but social policies is very still, it's very much a national competence or local competence. So there are some things that you can do, and then there are a lot of things that you cannot do. But when you talk about social policy, for example, minimum wage, we adopted a legislation recently on Kim, my boss, she's working on platform work, which means like workers that are driving for Uber or giving your food on the bike, these kind of people don't have a lot of rights. So this is something where you can do a lot. And when it comes to workers' rights, we try to show with a report on housing that the EU can also have a role in ensuring the right to housing. Well, there are a lot of things that we can do as an EU, and I think we are realizing that social policies is much more important to people as well. Because when we do a lot of surveys on Europe-wide, like what do you feel is important? Always number one or two, it's social exclusion and poverty. So that's what people on a day-to-day basis care about. It's about making ends meet, having a valuable job, all these things. I think Europe should take a stronger role in that, and we should not hide behind the fact that we don't have a lot of competence on the topic. I think there's a lot that we can do and more that we should do on that, for sure. Yeah.
I totally agree. I clearly love the EU, and even though I'm still able to criticize it because that's the way how can we move forward and how can we learn things. I believe that the role of the European Union is not just to be perfect, is to understand the weaknesses and do the best to make them better, and to find a way how to make better the issues such as human rights. Even though we have been created as an economic project, as you mentioned, now we are a political union. We are doing much more than 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And we are doing huge steps in different areas, but we need to follow our possibilities. We will see what will happen in the future. We need young people. We need definitely discussions such as conference on the future of Europe. And we need to create probably the future of Europe together. And that's thing I would like to say as a last. But as a very last, I would like to thank my guests here, Niccoló, Myrthe, Stevan, as well as my co-chair Tom, who had the technical problem. So he had the problem to connect back. And I would like to also invite you to our second panel, which is starting at 1 p.m. and where my colleagues from Finland and Bulgaria will talk about the migration policy in connection to the climate change and climate policy of the EU. So thank you very much. Thank you for your time during this morning panel, and I hope you will have a nice day.
Thanks a lot, Michaela. Thank you so much for the invitation, and everyone today for this really great discussion. I really enjoyed it. So, and really don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can find our email online, but really if there's any issue that you have or something that you're like, the EU needs to listen to this, then please send us an email and we'll try to make it work. But thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. And thank you also, TEPSA, for organizing, for having this amazing project. That were very nice time to spend and to be part of it on my side. So thank you very much.